The Hollywood gala was packed with flashing lights, reporters, and the kind of polished glamour only the rich and famous could afford. But Clint Eastwood wasn't the type to enjoy these events. He stood in a corner, quietly sipping a drink, half listening to an executive ramble about a new film deal. Then it happened. An old man in a military uniform stepped forward, cutting through the crowd with the kind of presence that silenced a room. His uniform was faded, the badges pinned on his chest, worn from time and war. But in his trembling hands, he held one particular medal, one that made even the hardened reporters pause. A Medal of Honor. He stopped right in front of Clint, his weathered face unreadable. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, he said, "Mr. Eastwood, this belongs to you." Silence. The cameras zoomed in. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Clint furrowed his brows. "I think you've got the wrong guy, sir." The old veteran shook his head. "Number, you saved my life, Clint Eastwood, and you didn't even know it." The veteran's name was James Calloway, a man who had served his entire life in the military. He had fought in wars, saved men on the battlefield, and carried the burden of fallen brothers. But decades ago, before any of that, he had been nothing more than a scared, lost recruit on the verge of giving up. He took a deep breath before continuing. "It was 1986. I was young, hot-headed, and ready to quit the Marines. Training was brutal, my spirit was broken, and I had convinced myself I wasn't cut out for it. That night, I planned to walk away for good. And then—" He paused, eyes locking onto Clint's. "I met you." Clint's face remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. "You were filming Heartbreak Ridge on base. I was just another face in the crowd, just another kid drowning in self-doubt. I remember standing outside, ready to pack my bags, when I heard your voice. You were talking to some crew members, saying, 'The difference between a man who makes history and one who's forgotten is simple. One keeps pushing forward, even when he's scared.'" James swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. That hit me like a bullet. I told myself, if a Hollywood actor understood grit better than I did, then what the hell was I doing quitting? So I stayed. And that decision saved my life. The crowd listened in stunned silence as James continued. "Because I stayed, I got deployed. I saw combat. I saved lives. And one day, in a hellhole overseas, I earned this—" He held up the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration for valor. "I took a bullet dragging my men out of enemy fire. I should have died, but I didn't. And all because one night a man named Clint Eastwood said the words I needed to hear." Clint's jaw tightened. He had played heroes on screen, but he had never imagined his words had shaped a real one. He never even remembered saying it. James took Clint's hand and placed the medal in his palm. "You inspired me, sir. Without knowing it, you changed my fate. And I believe this doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to the man who unknowingly put me on the right path." Clint looked down at the worn-out badge, his rough hands closing over it. The weight of history, of choices, of an unseen impact sank into him. James wiped his eyes, chuckling. "And funny enough, history's repeating itself." Clint's gaze lifted. "What do you mean?" "My grandson," James smiled. "He grew up watching your movies, just like I did. Gran Torino, Unforgiven, $1 Million Baby. Those stories became his lessons about honor and resilience. And guess what?" James pulled out a photo from his pocket. The picture showed a young Marine recruit, standing proudly in uniform. "He just joined the military last month, following in my footsteps." Your footsteps. Clint, for the first time that night, was speechless. The moment was heavy, charged with emotions too big for words. Reporters wiped their eyes. Actors who played war heroes stood in awe of a real one. And Clint Eastwood, the man who had built a legacy on tough roles, felt something stir deep inside him. Clint finally spoke, voice quieter than usual. I've been in this business for over 60 years, but I don't think I've ever been part of a story as powerful as this." James grinned. "Well, Mr. Eastwood, sometimes life writes the best scripts." Clint smirked. "That it does." And with that, the legend of Clint Eastwood grew, not just as an actor, but as a man whose unintended words had changed lives. And maybe, just maybe, it would change more in the years to come.